The security footage was grainy, the timestamp frozen at 2:14 in the morning. Lucas Whitmore had watched it 6 times. A roadside diner, a corner table barely lit by a flickering overhead bulb. 2 elderly figures, frail hunched, wrapped in coats, too thin for the Oregon winter, sitting across from a young waitress who slid a bowl of soup toward them like it was the most natural thing in the world. The old man reached up and touched her wrist. Slow, deliberate, something in that gesture cracked Lucas open. He knew that hand. He knew the way those fingers curled. His parents had been declared dead 8 years ago, bodies never recovered from Blue Ridge Pass. He had mourned them, rebuilt his life around that grief, and yet, there they were, warm, breathing, trusting a stranger completely. A stranger Lucas had never seen before in his life. Natalie Brooks had learned a long time ago that kindness was not free. It cost something always. A missed shift, a skipped meal, an extra hour standing on concrete floors when her feet had already given up. But she had never once figured out how to stop. The Sunnyside Diner sat on the edge of Route 9, wedged between a closed tire shop and a laundromat that smelled permanently of mildew. The neon sign buzzed more than it glowed. The booths had duct tape on 3 of the 4 corners. Most nights, the last customers were long gone by 9, leaving behind sticky menus and loose change that rarely added up to a real tip. Natalie wiped down tables in the thin yellow light, her apron still damp, her ponytail falling loose in the way it always did by the end of a double shift. She had been doing doubles since Emma turned 4. The math didn't lie. Daycare rent on a studio that was really just a large closet with a kitchen, the remaining hospital bills her ex-husband had left behind. When he walked out the door, with nothing but his jacket and a voicemail she hadn't listened to for months. Ryan had called it needing space. Natalie had called it something else entirely, but she didn't say that word in front of Emma. The old couple had appeared 5 months ago. That was how Natalie always thought of it. Appeared like something left behind by a tide she hadn't noticed coming in. One evening in late October, she had gone out to the back lot to drag in the plastic patio chairs before rain hit, and she had found them there. 2 elderly figures sitting inside a car with a cracked windshield and a rear bumper held on by wire. The engine was cold. The car hadn't moved in days. The woman was asleep against the window, a thin cardigan pulled around her shoulders. The man was awake, watching Natalie with eyes that were quiet and a little lost. She had brought them soup that first night. She hadn't asked Dennis. She hadn't asked anyone. She started calling them Walt and Claire because they couldn't quite remember their own names, or at least they couldn't hold on to them consistently. Walter had a deep scar along his hairline that pulled the skin above his left ear tight and white. Claire drifted in and out of the present tense like a radio signal losing its frequency. Some evenings, she knew exactly where she was. Spoke in full sentences, laughed at things Natalie said. Other nights, she sat with her hands folded in her lap and stared at something only she could see. The county shelter was already over capacity. The nearest memory care facility had a wait list and required documentation Walt and Claire simply didn't have. So Natalie had done the only thing that felt possible. She had cleared out the storage room behind the old feed supply building, 2 lots down, the one the owner hadn't touched in years, put down a cot and extra blankets, and started bringing them dinner every night after her shift ended. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself the same thing about a lot of things. Dennis Harlow had the particular talent of only noticing things that cost him money. He was at the register one Thursday evening, running through receipts with the expression of a man who believed the universe owed him a refund, when he looked up and watched Natalie slide 2 foam containers into a paper bag, tie it shut, and set it beside her coat near the back door. "What's that?" he asked. "End of night surplus," she said. "It'd go in the trash anyway. It goes in the trash because I say it goes in the trash." He came around the counter heavy-set and slow-moving, the kind of man who used his size as punctuation. "You've been doing this for those 2 strays in the lot, haven't you?" Natalie didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. "You bring them food one more time," Dennis said, "and you're done here. I'm not running a charity. You want to feed every drifter who wanders in off the highway, do it on your own dime." He walked back to the register. Natalie picked up the paper bag, put on her coat, and walked out the back door. The storage room smelled like pine and cold air. Walt was already awake, sitting on the edge of the cot with his hands between his knees. Claire was beside him, and for a moment she seemed more present than usual, her eyes clear, her posture straight. Natalie set the bag down on the small folding table she'd dragged over from the diner weeks ago and started unpacking the containers. Claire reached across and put her hand over Natalie's. Her grip was surprisingly firm. Natalie looked up, and Claire was watching her with an expression that didn't belong to the woman who usually stared at empty walls. It was focused, almost urgent. "Sweet girl," Claire said quietly. Her voice was steadier than Natalie had ever heard it. "Will Lucas find us? Or does he think we're dead, too?" The name landed like something dropped from a height. Natalie didn't move. Claire's fingers were still wrapped around her wrist. "Who is Lucas?" Natalie asked softly, but Claire had already drifted. Her eyes went soft around the edges, the clarity dissolving as quickly as it had surfaced, and she settled back against the wall with the vague, gentle expression she wore most evenings. Walt looked at Natalie with a small, helpless shrug, the kind that said he had watched this happen many times and still hadn't found a way to hold on to the moments when Claire surfaced. Natalie stayed another hour. She didn't sleep well that night. In New York, Lucas Whitmore sat alone in an office that took up the entire 42nd floor of a building his company owned outright. It was past midnight. The city pressed itself against the glass in streaks of gold and white, indifferent and enormous. On his desk, between two closed folders and a cold cup of coffee, was a tablet showing a video clip sent from Raymond Cole, the private investigator Lucas had retained for 8 years, with one standing instruction: run the facial recognition software, annually cross-reference against national and regional camera databases, and report anything above a 90% match. Raymond had sent this one with a note that read, only 96%. Portland, Oregon. Grocery store camera exterior. Date stamped 11 days ago. Lucas had watched the clip 5 times before he'd sent the voice message to Raymond, confirming receipt. He had watched it a 6th time just now. The man in the footage walked slowly, one hand extended behind him, not quite reaching back, just hovering, and the woman beside him moved into that half-offered hand, naturally the way water finds a channel. That was the thing. That was the specific thing that made Lucas's chest go tight, in a way no contract dispute or quarterly loss had ever managed. His father had walked his mother exactly like that every evening of Lucas's entire childhood. Not holding hands, just available, offering without asking. George and Margaret Whitmore had been declared legally dead 14 months after their car went off the road on Blue Ridge Pass. The guardrail had been found, bent outward. The car had not been recovered from the ravine. Lucas had been 28 years old and had spent the first year after their disappearance rebuilding Whitmore Capital into something his father would have recognized, because it was the only thing he knew how to do with his hands, while his chest stayed hollow. 2 years later, his wife Sarah had died of an aneurysm at 31, leaving him with a 2-year-old son and a silence in the apartment that never fully lifted. Oliver was 6 now. He slept 4 floors below this office in the residential penthouse, watched over by Mrs. Delaney, who had been with them since Oliver was 3, and who Lucas trusted more than almost anyone alive. Lucas closed the tablet. He sat with his hands flat on the desk for a long time. Every rational instinct he had built over 8 years of making decisions from controlled information and measured risk told him the same thing: a 96% match was not 100%. It was a number. Numbers had margins. He knew better than to let a margin destroy him twice. He picked up his phone and booked a one-way ticket to Portland. He called Mrs. Delaney, who answered on the second ring without surprise, because she had learned not to be surprised by Lucas's timing. He told her he needed 3 days, maybe 4. She told him Oliver had a school project due Thursday. He told her he would call Thursday morning. She told him to drive carefully. He didn't tell her he was planning to drive, he just said he would. He left Oliver sleeping. He stood in the doorway of his son's room for a moment, watching the rise and fall of the blanket the small fist curled near the pillow. Then he went downstairs, got into his car, and started driving west. He didn't know what he was going to find in Portland. He didn't know if the couple in the footage were his parents or 2 strangers who happened to share a gesture, a posture, the particular way of moving through the world that his memory had spent 8 years keeping precise and intact. What he knew was that he had watched his father's hand reach back for his mother one more time, and he had not been able to stay still. He arrived on a Tuesday just before closing. Natalie heard the bell above the diner door and didn't look up from the counter she was wiping down. The last table had cleared out 20 minutes ago. Dennis had already gone to the back office to count the register, which meant she had a narrow window to pack the evening containers before he came back out. "We're closing," she said. "I'm not here to eat." She looked up then. The man standing just inside the door was wrong for the room in every possible way. Dark wool coat, pressed collar shoes that had never touched gravel. He was tall and angular, the kind of person who took up space deliberately, and he was looking past her toward the corner table where Walt and Claire were finishing the last of their soup. Natalie stepped sideways, put herself between him and the table. "Can I help you?" she said. It wasn't a question. "My name is Lucas Whitmore." He said it the way people said things they expected to be recognized. "Those 2 people, I need to speak with them." "No," he blinked. "Excuse me." I said, "No." She kept her voice low and even. She had seen people come in before, a county worker, once a man who claimed to be a nephew, another who said he was a pastor from a church down the road. She had learned to read intent from posture, and this man's posture said he was accustomed to doors opening before he touched them. "I don't know who you are. They don't have anyone. And until I know exactly what you want with them, you're not getting within 10 feet of that table." Lucas looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not anger. Something closer to frustration mixed with something else he didn't have a name for. "I drove from New York," he said. "I've been driving for 2 days." "That's a long way to go based on nothing," Natalie said. "What makes you think those are your parents?" "The way my father walks." His jaw tightened. "The way he reaches back for her without looking. I've been watching for that specific thing for 8 years. He reached into his coat and set a photograph on the counter. A family portrait, a couple in their mid-60s dressed for some formal occasion smiling at the camera. "That's George and Margaret Whitmore. They went off a mountain road 8 years ago. The car was never found." Natalie looked at the photograph for a long time. Walt and Claire looked back at her from it, younger and sharper-eyed, but unmistakably themselves. From the corner table, Walt's voice came quietly across the room. "That young man." His words came slow, reaching through fog. "He looks like my son." Lucas turned. He saw Walt looking at him with that particular lost clarity, the expression of a man trying to reach through fog. Lucas crossed the room before Natalie could stop him, and then he was standing at the table, and Walt was looking up at him, and neither of them spoke. Walt reached out and touched the small scar along Lucas's jaw, the one from a bicycle fall when Lucas was 9 years old, the one that had bled so much his father had carried him 3 blocks to the car because Lucas was too scared to walk. "I know this," Walt said softly. "I know this scar." Lucas sat down in the empty chair across from his father. His shoulders dropped. His hands came up to cover his face, and he stayed like that, a man who had spent 8 years holding everything in place, and the sound he made was quiet and broken and entirely private. Natalie stood at the counter and did not look away because she understood that some moments needed a witness. She set one condition. She would be present for every meeting at any time for as long as Walt and Claire needed her there. Lucas agreed without argument, which surprised her. The reunions happened slowly over several days. George Lucas had started using their real names, though quietly, with care would recognize his son in flashes. A turn of phrase, a specific gesture. The scar. Each recognition lasted only minutes before the fog returned, but Lucas learned to receive those minutes without demanding more of them. Claire was harder. She looked at Lucas with warmth, but without placement, the way you might look at someone familiar in a dream. What she didn't lose, in any moment of clarity or confusion, was her recognition of Natalie, the woman she had known first in the dark and the cold as Claire. The conflict arrived on the fourth day, as Natalie had known it would. Lucas had spent the previous evening on the phone. She could hear the low cadence of it through the thin wall of the storage room, where she'd started staying later, to help Claire settle. And by morning, he had arranged for a private physician to fly in from Portland. General, a full neurological workup transfer paperwork for a memory care facility in Manhattan that reportedly had a 2-year waiting list. He had evidently collapsed into 4 days. No, Natalie said when he explained it at the counter over coffee she had poured and he hadn't touched. It's the best facility in the country. I don't doubt that, but you can't move her. She's my mother. She's also a woman whose entire nervous system reorganizes itself around familiarity, Natalie said. She knows this room. She knows the smell of this counter and the sound of that door and the way the light comes through that window at 4 in the afternoon. Every piece of that matters to her. You put her in a car to an airport and then a plane and then a building she's never seen, and you won't just be disrupting her. You'll be erasing the last stable ground she has. She set down her coffee cup. I've watched her for 5 months. That's what I know. Lucas's jaw worked. And I've been searching for her for 8 years. I know that too. The silence between them was taut and specific. George broke it. He had been sitting at his usual table, hands folded, listening with the partial attention he sometimes had in the mornings. And now he looked up at Natalie and said, "She stays. Rosie needs her. Rosie." The nickname sat in the air like something delicate. Lucas stared at his father. Natalie had never heard that name before, but the way Lucas's expression shifted a sharp, involuntary recognition told her it meant something that predated everything in this room. Lucas stayed. He rented a room at the only hotel within 3 miles, a place called the Bridgeview Inn that Natalie suspected had not been reviewed favorably by anyone in recent memory, and he began appearing at the diner every evening. He was careful with George and Claire, slower than she had expected, more patient. He didn't push for conversation or recognition. He just sat near them close enough to matter and let the time pass at whatever pace his father's mind would allow. What he was not careful about was everything else. Natalie discovered it on a Thursday. She had gone into the back office to drop off the day's tip log Dennis required a written record, another thing she had long stopped questioning, and found a printout face down on the corner of the desk. She turned it over. It was a background report. Her name was at the top in clean, bold type, followed by her address, her employment history, Emma's school enrollment, the outstanding balance on a medical debt that she had not told anyone about in this building. She found Lucas at his usual table that evening. She set the printout down in front of him without speaking. He looked at it. He did not look away from it quickly enough to be innocent. "You had someone run my background," she said. "I needed to know who had access to my parents. They're not assets, Mr. Whitmore. They're people, and I'm not a liability risk." She kept her voice level because the alternative was something she couldn't afford in public. "You can control every variable in your company. You can pull reports and run numbers and manage the exposure. But you cannot buy your father's trust back with a wire transfer, and you cannot manage your mother into recognizing you. That is not a problem with a solution you can purchase, and the sooner you understand that, the less damage you'll do." Lucas said nothing. He folded the printout in half and slid it off the table. It was the closest thing to an apology she was going to get, and she understood that. What she didn't understand, not yet, was why she was still standing there after she'd said it. He came back the next evening, and the one after that. They developed a kind of working arrangement that neither of them named. Natalie managed Walt and Claire's routine. Lucas managed the logistics, the physician visits, the medication, tracking the quiet arrangement he'd made with the owner of the storage building to have proper heating installed, without anyone making a fuss about it. He also called Raymond Cole and instructed him to close out the search file permanently. There was nothing left to find. He didn't announce these things. He just did them and said nothing, and Natalie noticed and said nothing in return. He put an envelope on the counter one night, thick, sealed with her name on it, in handwriting that was precise and deliberate. She picked it up, felt the weight of it, and set it back down. "I don't want that," she said. Lucas looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He picked it up and put it back in his coat pocket, and something in his face shifted in a way she didn't have a name for, not gratitude exactly. More like the specific disorientation of a man who had operated inside a particular set of rules for a very long time, and had just discovered that those rules didn't apply in this room. It was Claire who said it on a quiet Sunday evening when the diner was empty, and the four of them were sitting together without any particular agenda. Claire had been more present than usual, finishing sentences, tracking conversations, smiling at the right moments. She looked at Natalie and Lucas seated beside each other at the counter and tilted her head with an expression of uncomplicated pleasure. "You two look like a family," she said simply. Neither Lucas nor Natalie responded. George reached over and patted Claire's hand with the automatic tenderness of a decades-long habit, and Claire leaned into him, and the room held that for a moment before it moved on. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. Natalie didn't know it had happened until she pulled into the diner's lot and saw the van parked sideways across two spaces, the logo of a local news affiliate on the side. By the time she got to the door, there were two more vehicles behind it, and her phone had begun producing the specific rapid-fire vibration of messages arriving faster than she could read them. The headline, she saw it on a screen someone was holding just inside the doorway, read "Whitmore heirs missing parents, found alive hidden in Oregon by diner employee." The word "hidden" was doing significant work in that sentence. Dennis had sold the story. She understood this immediately and completely, with the flat clarity of a thing that should have been predicted and wasn't. He had watched Lucas Whitmore walk into his diner for 2 weeks and had done the arithmetic. It turned out Dennis Harlow had one talent that surpassed even his gift for resentment. He knew the price of everything the moment someone else wanted it. Within 40 minutes, the lot had 7 vehicles in it. Cameras were set up facing the entrance. A woman in a blazer was doing a live segment from the sidewalk, using the Sunnyside Diner sign as her backdrop. A man in a suit, who introduced himself as representing the Whitmore family's legal interests, arrived in a town car and began speaking to Lucas in rapid, pressurized sentences near the back booth. Claire heard the noise and came apart. It happened quickly. One moment she was seated at her usual table, hands folded. Then a camera flash strobed through the front window, and Claire stood up so fast her chair scraped back against the floor, and the sound that came from her was not quite a word and not quite a cry, but something caught between the sound of a person whose interior architecture had just lost a wall. She backed against the corner and pressed herself there, eyes moving too fast, breath coming in shallow pulls. Natalie was across the room before anyone else moved. She put herself in Claire's line of sight, took both her hands, and said her name. Claire. Just that quiet and direct, until the breathing began to slow. Lucas stood 6 feet away and watched his mother reach for Natalie's hands and hold them with the grip of someone who had found the only solid thing in the room. Outside, Dennis appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man who believed he had done nothing wrong. He pointed at Natalie. The cameras turned. "She's terminated," he said loudly enough for the nearest microphone to catch it. "Effective right now. She's been stealing food from this establishment for months and harboring individuals on private property without authorization." Someone nearby was recording on a phone. Emma, who had been sitting in the back booth coloring because school didn't start until 9, looked up at the sound of her mother's name, said in that tone, and her face did the thing it did when she was about to cry, but was trying to figure out first whether she was allowed to. Natalie did not turn around. She kept her hands over Claire's and her eyes on Claire's face, and she did not let go. But she heard every word, and she felt the particular quality of the silence that followed, the kind that meant the cameras had caught something. She had no job. She had no income. Her name was attached to a headline that used the word hidden. Her daughter was watching from a corner booth with wide, uncertain eyes, and outside the lot kept filling. Lucas looked at the lawyer who was already talking about reputational containment and coordinated statements and the optics of a voluntary return to New York before the story metastasized further. He looked at his father, who had moved to stand near Natalie and Claire with the slow, deliberate gravity of a man who had decided where he belonged in a room. He looked at Natalie, still holding his mother's hands, still not turning around. Still the only reason Claire was breathing normally. Everything Lucas Whitmore had built in 8 years was premised on a single operating principle: control the variables, and the outcome becomes manageable. He was beginning to understand that he had been working with the wrong set of variables all along. The hospital was a 40-minute drive from the diner, and Natalie made it in 32. She had gotten the call at 1:47 in the morning, a nurse, not Lucas, which told her the situation was bad enough, that Lucas was not free to use his hands. Claire had been admitted 2 hours earlier, after the episode at the diner had continued deteriorating through the afternoon and into the evening. Disorientation, respiratory distress, repeated attempts to leave the room. The attending physician had used the phrase acute stress response and recommended sedation. According to the nurse, Claire had refused to settle. She had been asking for someone repeating the name without context, with the specific insistence of a person who knows exactly what they need, even when they cannot explain why. She had been asking for Natalie. The ward was dim and hushed at that hour. Lucas was standing in the hallway outside Claire's room, with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and when he saw Natalie come through the double doors, he said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and took Claire's hands. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I've got you. Everything is the same." Claire's breathing changed within minutes. Not resolved, but anchored. She turned her head toward Natalie with the trust of someone arriving somewhere safe after a long and disorienting journey, and eventually her eyes closed. Lucas was still in the hallway when Natalie came back out. He was standing with his back against the wall, looking at nothing in particular, with the posture of a man who had been very strong for a very long time, and was running a deficit he could no longer conceal. "The attorney wants me to issue a statement by morning," he said. "Controlled narrative. Voluntary return to New York framed as a family decision. He says the longer we stay in Portland, the more the story becomes about you, which creates legal exposure for the company." He stopped. "He also says I should consider whether my ongoing association with you is complicating the optics of the reunion." Natalie leaned against the opposite wall and looked at him directly. "What do you think?" Lucas turned his head toward his mother's room. Through the narrow window in the door, Claire was visible small and still, under a hospital blanket, finally sleeping. "I think," he said carefully, "that I flew to Portland because I saw my father reach back for my mother through a security camera, and I think my mother just spent 4 hours in distress in a hospital bed, and the only thing that helped was a woman who drove here at 2 in the morning because a nurse called her." He pushed off the wall. "I think I've been confusing control with care for a very long time." He fired the attorney the next morning. He made one call to his board chair, brief, declarative, not a request for permission, And then he called a contact at the Associated Press and said he wanted to make a statement. Not through a publicist, not through counsel. Himself on camera at a time of his choosing. The press conference was held in the hospital's small outdoor courtyard at noon. Lucas stood without notes. He spoke for 11 minutes. He told them about the accident, about the years of searching about the facial recognition software he had run every year like a ritual he couldn't name. He told them about the 96% match and the drive from New York. He told them about a woman who had found 2 elderly people sleeping in a broken-down car in a diner parking lot and had quietly, without announcement or expectation, built them a life. He said Natalie Brooks's name clearly and without qualification. He said she had given his parents more dignity in 5 months than the grief industry had offered his family in 8 years. He said that what she had done was not a complication. It was the whole point. The story did not go away. But it changed shape. Dennis Harlow received a call from Lucas Whitmore's office 3 days later. The terms were straightforward. Lucas was purchasing the Sunnyside Diner and its associated property at a price Dennis had no practical reason to refuse. Dennis asked if there was room to negotiate. He was informed there was not, and that the footage of him publicly terminating an employee on camera while a child watched from a corner booth had been noted by more than one employment attorney already. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Dennis said he understood. A letter confirming the termination of his managerial role arrived by end of week. He did not contest it. Lucas presented the diner purchase to Natalie not as a gift, but as a question. He sat across from her at the corner table. George's table, the one that had become the gravitational center of every conversation that mattered, and he set a single document in front of her, a partnership agreement, her name beside his equal operational control of the establishment, a revenue structure that reflected actual labor rather than inherited ownership. "This isn't charity," he said. "You've been running this place. The title should match the reality." Natalie read the document slowly. She turned to the second page, then the third. "You want to be in the diner business," she said. "I want to be in this diner's business," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment, the same look she had given him the night she'd set the background report in front of him, measuring something she didn't fully name. Then she picked up the pen. George and Margaret moved into a small house on Aldermore Street, 4 blocks from the diner, a single story with a porch and a garden that caught the afternoon light. The last night in the storage room, Natalie had stood in the doorway after George and Claire were settled, looked at the cot and the folding table and the extra blankets, and felt the specific weight of a chapter that had done its job. She turned off the light and did not go back. The neurologist Lucas had arranged flew in from Portland twice a week. The routines that Natalie had established over 5 months remained intact. The same timing, the same table at the diner, the same order of events that gave Claire's mind the scaffolding it needed to stay present as long as possible. The change was incremental: better medication, management, proper records, a space that belonged to them. But the foundation was unchanged. George seemed to understand this. He stopped looking frightened when the word home came up. There was one afternoon about 3 weeks after they had settled on Aldermore Street that stayed with Natalie longer than the rest. Claire had been clear all day, sharper and more continuous than Natalie had seen her in weeks, tracking conversation, remembering what had been said. An hour earlier, laughing at a story George told about a road trip they had taken decades ago that he told inexactly, and she corrected twice. The 3 of them were sitting on the porch, the light coming in low and gold across the railing, when Claire reached over and took Natalie's hand. Then she reached across Natalie and took Lucas's hand, where it rested on the arm of the chair beside her. She placed them together, Natalie's over Lucas's deliberate and unhurried, and then she folded her own hands in her lap and looked out at the garden with an expression of complete satisfaction, as though she had just finished something she had been meaning to do for a long time. Neither Natalie nor Lucas moved their hands. George watched from his chair and said nothing. He was smiling at something beyond the garden, the private smile of a man who recognizes an ending he has been waiting for. Oliver arrived on a Friday. He was 6 years old with Lucas's coloring, and an expression that suggested he was gathering data at all times, watchful, without being cautious the way children are when they have spent a lot of time in adult spaces and learned to read the room. Mrs. Delaney brought him to Portland on a direct flight, delivered him to the Bridgeview Inn with his backpack and his Thursday school project, already graded, and returned, and then quietly went home because she understood her role. Emma had been informed by Natalie that morning that someone new was coming to the diner and that she should be herself, which was Natalie's way of saying, don't perform, don't shrink, just be. Emma processed this information and then asked if the someone was a boy or a girl. Natalie said boy, and Emma said okay, and returned to her coloring. The two children regarded each other across the diner for approximately 4 minutes before Emma picked up a red crayon and held it out without preamble. I have 2 of this color, she said. It was not an offer so much as a statement of resource allocation. Oliver sat down across from her, accepted the crayon, and the matter was settled. By the time Lucas came in from parking the car, they were in the back booth together, Emma explaining something about her drawings with the complete authority of a person who has established domain, and Oliver listening with the attentiveness of someone who found her convincing. Lucas stood in the doorway and watched his son lean forward to look more closely at the drawing Emma was describing, and something moved through his chest, quiet and complicated, and not entirely painful. George was at his usual table. He saw Lucas looking at the children and said without looking up from his coffee, "Good kids know each other right away. We were like that. Your mother and I." He touched the rim of his cup. "Met her at a lunch counter, you know. She was working. I sat down and didn't even pretend I was hungry." Lucas sat down across from him. "You've told me that story." "I know," George said. "I tell it because I still like it." A year later, the sign above the door read, "Claire's Table," in hand-painted letters, warm white on dark green. The name had come naturally. It was what Natalie had always called her, the name she had given the woman before any other name was known. And it had stuck the way honest things do. The renovation had kept the bones of the place, the counter, the corner booths, the window that caught the afternoon light at 4 o'clock, and changed almost everything else. The duct tape was gone. The neon no longer flickered. The menu had 3 daily soups rotating, always made from scratch. On a Tuesday morning in early November, Natalie was behind the counter when Lucas came in. No wool coat, no pressed collar. A plain jacket worn at the left cuff that she had seen him wear 4 times in the past month. He moved through the room, the way people move through spaces that belong to them. Not ownership, but familiarity, the kind that accrues without announcement. George and Margaret were at the corner table. Oliver and Emma sat across from them, both talking at the same time, competing for George's attention, with the cheerful aggression of children who have learned that this particular audience is patient and appreciative. George was laughing. Claire had her hands wrapped around her mug and was watching the children with the expression she wore on good days, present warm somewhere she recognized. Lucas came around the end of the counter and stood beside Natalie. "Do you have soup?" he asked. Natalie watched Emma demonstrate something with her hands that made George laugh again. She watched Claire reach across the table and straighten Oliver's collar with the automatic tenderness of a woman who had spent a lifetime caring for people without thinking about it, as a choice. "For you," she said, "there's always soup." The morning moved on around them. Dishes, voices, the door opening and closing, the ordinary and irreplaceable texture of a place that had become, without anyone planning it, exactly this way, a home. Some people lose everything and rebuild with bare hands. Some people have everything and still lose what matters most. And sometimes a simple bowl of soup is the thing that pulls 2 worlds back together.